It's really hard to live in San Francisco and not wonder that the annual budget is like $13 billion, but there's a lot of people living on the streets. There's so many ways in which humans have progressed in the last 100 plus years, but urban planning is one where we've mostly regressed. I realized I should stop complaining about how we're not building enough housing and I could actually go build it myself. So I am building a new village 90 minutes north of San Francisco. It's called Esmeralda. It's inspired by this small town in Western New York called Chautauqua. In our first phase, we're expecting about 1,600 people to live there.
I know it's such a complex problem that you're solving. How exactly do you even build a town? Okay, well, Devin, thank you again for joining us. Welcome to the Coral Capital podcast. I've heard so many great things about you. And I know technically, Alex, it's your first time co-hosting or guest hosting as well. So do you actually want to start with a quick intro?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Tiffany, so much for having me. And Devin, thank you for joining us. Do you want to just say hi so people can hear your voice?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you. Beautiful. We'll let you do a proper intro shortly, but just a little bit of context on me. I was at Founders Fund for over 10 years and got to know Coral through my time at Founders Fund. And I'm in Tokyo for 3 months doing a very multi-hat. I wore the hat for sun protection and for figurative purposes as well. In a very multi-hat role, they've given me a lot of creative freedom to work on a lot of different things here, and maybe we can talk about that later. But one of those things is Tiffany's been gracious enough to let me think about podcast guests and who I want to talk to here in Tokyo. And I was walking around the streets. Devin, I was just like on a long walk and your name just popped into my head because I obviously I'm new here in Tokyo. So I'm obviously thinking a lot about place. And I was like, I wanted to have someone on who I think could be philosophical, be interesting, talk from a founder's perspective, but also have some insight into some of the things that have been top of mind for me being a new person here in Tokyo. So that's when I reached out and you so kindly agreed to come on and join us. And I will toss it to you. Like, tell us who you are and what you're working on.
Amazing. Okay, I didn't know that backstory of how you thought of bringing me on, and now I'm extra honored because my favorite thing to do is to go on a long walk. I think it's basically the best activity there is. So I'm glad you thought of that. But I'm Devin. I am building a new village about 90 minutes north of San Francisco. It's called Esmeralda, and I'll go into a lot more on this later probably. But it's inspired by this small town in Western New York called Chautauqua, which is where my grandmother lives. And I would spend every summer in my childhood going to visit her. And it's this incredible place. And I like to talk about it in terms of the hardware and the software. And on the hardware side, Chautauqua has these incredible walkable streets. Every house has a front porch. People actually use their porches. It's the most important room of every house. But then on the software side, there's also this incredible programming where for 9 weeks every summer, they host lectures and workshops. And it's kind of like a college campus, except it's multi-generational. And there's everything from, my grandmother down to me when I was a little kid. And even my great-grandparents would be there when they were still alive. And so anyways, Chautauqua has been a huge influence on my life personally. And now for the last few years, I've been working on building a Chautauqua of the West in California wine country. So that's a little bit about me and what I'm currently working on.
Super cool. I want to get into all things Esmeralda as well. But before we do that, can we maybe touch a little bit on your background? Because, you had already mentioned hardware and software in the context of urban planning, but I feel like your experience is super unique. Like it's not like you started out in urban planning. You worked in software and like other tech startups as well. So we'd love to get into that.
Yeah, I have a bit of an unique background because what I'm essentially doing is actually real estate development. I think of it in terms of urban planning, but really at the end of the day, we're like buying a piece of land, we're subdividing it and putting in infrastructure, and then we're going to be building buildings on it. And so I'm a real estate developer, but my background coming to that is not typical. People usually come from like law or like a more urban planning background. In college at Stanford, I studied computer science and economics. And for the first part of my career, I spent it as a software engineer and programmer, and then later as like a product manager at a variety of companies. And I've worked at GitHub, which is probably the one people are most familiar with. I did a podcast series with Notion. which I think is really popular in Japan, I think is what I've heard.
Yeah.
And I've worked in a bunch of other places as well. I worked at Affirm, which was a founders fund funded company. That was my whole world. But I was living in San Francisco throughout that whole period. It's really hard to live in San Francisco and not wonder like what's going on with this city. Like I love it from the bottom of my heart, but also, and it's so beautiful and it has so much wealth and so much opportunity. And then at the same time, there's people living on the streets and like a lot of people living on the streets. And I think the annual budget, if I'm remembering correctly, is like $13 billion. And yet there's like basic services that just like don't work. And so I fell down that rabbit hole and sort of bottomed out realizing a lot of it is because of housing policy and land use policy. And so I got really involved in that. And long story short, through doing a lot of housing and land use activism, I realized like I should stop complaining about how we're not building enough housing, and I should go do something about it. I could actually go build it myself. So I still love building software. I expect to continue doing it, and I like built our website for Esmeralda. But these days, I'm mostly deep in land use documents and California environmental legislation and things like that.
By the way, I went to San Francisco for the first time. I think it was early this year. And I had heard a lot of negative things about San Francisco. And I think it was just because it was like post-COVID. But honestly, after visiting, I feel like, it's recovering. The city's coming back to life. So my impressions were pretty positive after that. Yeah.
Great. You were cold. She was cold.
I was cold. That was freezing.
She was a little cold.
I absolutely adore San Francisco. I think it's a beautiful, wonderful city that has a lot of things going right. And I also just think that like we can do better.
Totally.
But yeah, I think that people who are like, oh, San Francisco's over. It's like, no, it's got a lot. It's one of the most beautiful places in the country.
Totally. I spent my entire tenure there welcoming guests from out of town who were surprised at how beautiful it was. And I would say, yeah, maybe that's a good segue to what is placemaking in general. With if San Francisco gonna reinvent itself, placemaking as a word. Let's define some terms. What is placemaking?
Placemaking is a term that a lot of people use in different ways. So I'll describe kind of what it means to me. I think it's about making spaces that are memorable and meaningful for people, and spaces that support a certain way of life or things that we actually care about, as opposed to just being space, like literal space that we walk through that doesn't really do anything. And I realize that's kind of abstract, but like, imagine the difference between like an empty corporate plaza where like it's just a bunch of paving and like no shade, and you're just kind of sitting there and you're like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to have lunch here, as opposed to like a thoughtfully designed, it could still be a plaza, but maybe it has like landscaping and places that are thoughtful around like where you sit. And this is at the micro level. I think it can also be true at the macro level, but you can just tell when people have put thought into a space and tried to make it a place that actually supports what you're trying to achieve. Maybe it's just getting lunch with your coworkers, as opposed to just like, it's a plane that you can sit on and it doesn't really do anything for you. And so, yeah, it's a bit of an abstract term, but I think that's what people are often trying to get at when they're talking about placemaking.
Thank you. And give a term that you use. One of your terms is traveling neighborhoods. I feel like that'll be a good segue back into Esmeralda. Tell us about traveling neighborhoods.
Yeah. So traveling neighborhood is something that I've been doing for the last, 5 years or something. And it kind of happened by accident, like most good things. My husband is from Argentina, and so we go to Argentina every December for at least a few weeks, sometimes a whole month. And I love being in Buenos Aires, but at the same time, my Spanish is like, I'm like a smart 6-year-old or something like that. And so I can't fully express myself. And after a few years of going, I realized like I get kind of lonely when I don't get to see my friends. And so the next year I invited a bunch of friends to come down to Buenos Aires with us. And next thing I knew, like 50 people were staying in a neighborhood, and everyone got like Airbnbs, and we like all just like lived in BA for a month together. And it was so much fun that we did it the next year. And it made me realize that there's this really cool format for traveling that you can do, especially now that more people work remotely and there's more flexibility in work. You can actually like take a whole bunch of friends and just live somewhere for a week, a month, and still be productive and getting your life done, but have the experience of sort of transplanting into another neighborhood. And one of the things that's extra cool about it is you're actually going to be probably living in closer proximity to those friends than in your home city. And also it works if you have, like, a lot of my friends are international or they live in different cities. And so with a lot of my friends, like I've spent more time with them in Argentina than I have like anywhere else in the world. And I've now used this format in a few other places like Taipei, Las Catalinas in Costa Rica, Chautauqua actually as well, and a few other places. And it's just a really fun way to travel as a group. And the last thing I'll say about it is you get to see the city in a different way too. Because if you just go to a city in like an atomized way, you experience what it's like to be there as an individual. But if you go with a group of people, you can get the individual experience, but you also experience like, what is it like to get, I don't know, a dinner reservation for 8 people? Or I started playing paddle when I was down in Buenos Aires because now I had all these friends that I could play with.
Devin,
And
what's
like
paddle?
every night we'd play. Or some people call it padel. I'm actually still not sure. It's like
similar to
tennis, but
pickleball?
even
Right.
more fun.
Pickleball?
I think it's similar
No,
to it, but it's
no.
like separate, right? It's
Paddle. It's like tennis, except you can use all of the walls. It's more like squash than like tennis.
I see, I
Okay.
see.
Copy.
And it's very popular in Latin America, but like I didn't have people to play with before, and now I do. And so I got to play this like really fun Latin American sport because I had like an inbuilt group of people to play it with. So anyway, that's what I call a traveling neighborhood, and I've now shared the idea with other people, and other people have done them as well, and it's just a really fun way to travel the world.
Hearing you talk about this kind of made me realize I always thought of cities as having personalities. I lived in Paris for a couple of years. I've lived a lot of places too, not as many as you and Tiffany, I think, but Paris is a city built for couples. So if you're couples in small groups, New York is much more individual. Tokyo is actually much more individual. I think what you're building at Esmeralda and based on Chautauqua is for families and for real community, like real mixed communities. And maybe we can talk more about that. But I felt that so much, just being able to experience a city with, if you have a group versus as an individual versus as a couple. Okay, last question on defining of terms. For urban planning broadly, are there terms that we should know or that our listeners should know? Anything else that is like a helpful definition to have?
I'm really deep in the weeds right now on like land use regulation in California specifically. And there's a bunch of terms there. I don't know if I want to subject your listeners to learning about all the different rules and laws and regulations. But like one that we'll probably talk about just because it's unavoidable it's called CEQA. It's an acronym, CEQA, which stands for California Environmental Quality Act. And we can talk about it later, but one thing I'll say about it is it says that it's an environmental law, and it does have some really important environmental components that do protect the environment. And also it creates this really large surface area for lawsuits and it's one of the main reasons why very few things get built in California anymore. So that's probably not as fun of an answer as what you're looking for. But it is where I spend a lot of my time thinking during the day.
I feel like we see that happen a lot though, where like laws or regulations are placed to try to protect people or try to make it a more livable city, but then you actually end up getting the negative result of that, where it's just like you're prohibiting so much that it makes developing and change like very, very difficult to accomplish. So
that's one of the things I mentioned to you, Devin, when I first reached out to Hook. Like obviously very different in each locality, but in Tokyo in 1990s construction is considered old because of regulations for like earthquake retrofitting. And Tiffany could probably speak more to this, but yeah, I was just walking here with some colleagues, week one, and they were like, yeah, that's old, built in the 90s. I was like, 1990s, the 1990s. And so just a regulatory environment is important. So thank you for that definition of terms, and the nerdy stuff I'm sure we'll have a chance to revisit.
In Tokyo, like the average house, I think is 30 years in terms of lifespan. And then it's usually just rebuilt. So everything's very new. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. It's something I need to understand better. Like I've read a bit about it, but one of the things I wonder is like, how are construction materials relatively cheaper too? Because like again, we'll probably get into this later in the conversation, but like for our project, regulation is one of the constraints, but then also like construction costs are another one. And so even if there was no regulatory issue, construction costs like would make it hard to tear everything down and like rebuild it again. There is a feedback loop between those two things, because if you make it hard to build stuff, then the people who build the thing can't live in the city, and so they have to drive from far away, and then they charge you more because they're driving like 3 hours each way for work. So like I have some sense of like a mental model there, but I really need to understand better how Japan has managed to avoid that loop.
On the labor side, I think it's all accessible here in this, because Tokyo is a metropolis, the largest city in the world by population. So that side is probably covered. On the materials, I don't know.
Yeah, I actually don't know on the materials. It's something, I probably need to dig into.
That's super cool.
Yeah, we'll let you walk through and showcase your knowledge a little later in the conversation.
Yeah, and I also want to get into all things Esmeralda. So can you paint the viewers and us like a picture of what you envision when you're thinking about Esmeralda?
Yeah, totally. So earlier I was mentioning how Chautauqua, the town where my grandma lives, it has this incredible hardware and incredible software. And we'd like to do something similar, but also different, because it's a different context in California. And I use this phrase like village urbanism. And one thing and maybe that's another term to define. So village urbanism is actually not a term that I've heard too many other people use, but it's probably somewhat self-explanatory, where I think in the United States, typically you have like big hypertrophic cities, like cities with like big skyscrapers, which are super cool, by the way. And there's also, suburbia, which can also be super cool and is like very spread out. But there's not that many things like in the middle. And in particular, there are very few things where like, if you've ever been to Tuscany, like, or Mediterranean villages, or actually a lot of villages in Japan as well, where the traditional villages, they'll tend to have a very like hard edge where it's quite urban. Even if it's a small town, it'll be very dense and compact, and everything's in a small walking distance. But then there's a hard edge on that urbanism, and suddenly you're in the countryside. And that's a pattern that's just like not that common in the US. And sadly, I think it's becoming less and less common worldwide in more like contemporary developments for a variety of reasons. But we think that people really like it. Like I certainly like it. And I'm actually going on my first vacation in a while, in a few weeks, and going to be going to some small towns that have this property. And what we're trying to build is like a small walkable town core with like a core, piazza place where you can get a coffee, you can get some groceries, maybe there's a restaurant, but then, and everything's in really close walking distance, but then also you can get out to fields and countryside and agriculture really quickly. And I think that like in the US, we typically have suburban development where everyone has like a medium amount of green space, as opposed to having sort of more public spaces that are large and green around. So I'm not sure if I'm articulating that very clearly, but just basically picture like almost an Italian hill town where you have like a small little village crowning the top of a hill, and then beautiful countryside all around it. So that's what we're trying to create. And I think the reason we don't have that much of that in modern days, especially in the US, is because there's rarely people who are holding that as a goal. There's a bit of a coordination problem where everyone wants as much green space as they individually can get from in their own private property, which I want that too, by the way. Like if I could have a whole block of Manhattan and turn it into like my private mansion with beautiful gardens, and then also have access to the rest of Manhattan, like I would take that. The problem is that if we each take a block of Manhattan, now suddenly you don't have Manhattan anymore. And like I think the car has basically caused this coordination problem, because before, if you couldn't get into a car, like you're just kind of constrained to whatever you could get on foot or on a bike or like in a horse. So anyways, that's what I mean by village urbanism. And then I guess I should also talk about the software side. So I think that any place is not just about the buildings and the infrastructure, although those can play a huge role in creating culture of a place. It's also about the actual people and the way that they interact and their goals for how they interact with each other. And Chautauqua has been really inspiring for me, because for those 9 weeks every summer, they have the incredible programming, and it's something that brings people together. So like every morning, just to picture it concretely, like every morning at I think it's 10 a.m., Chautauqua hosts a lecture that basically the entire town goes to. And then after the lecture, people like walk out and you'll like bump into your neighbor and go, oh, wow, what did you think of the author that just talked about their book, or the scientist who talked about their research? And you get into this place where you're not just asking about the weather or like not even having a conversation in the first place. You instantly have shared context. And I think college does this really well as well. And so, borrowing from that idea, we've done something that we call a pop-up village, where for the last 2 years, for a month, in a small town that's very close to where we're actually building Esmeralda, we host something called Edge Esmeralda, where we have 1,000 people living. It's basically like a giant traveling neighborhood, and every day there's like lectures and workshops and activities and a kids camp. And we all live in this small town together. And the idea is that once Esmeralda, the physical place, is built, we're going to be able to transplant this community and put it into the physical buildings and the infrastructure, and create that permanent home for that community. And I think I love using like gardening metaphors. Like I feel like we have this community in like a starter pot, and we're going to like transplant it into like a permanent garden once the garden is like all fertile and plowed and stuff like that. So that's the hardware and the software side.
I know Edge Esmeralda is really close to the permanent site that you guys are building, and it's also in the US, so that makes sense. But the new pop-up that you guys are doing in, I think, October and November in Argentina, is that your relationship with your husband being Argentinian and you spending some time there? Like, curious, like how you're selecting those locations.
Yeah. So Edge Esmeralda has been this really cool partnership with a group called Edge City, and they do pop-up villages all around the world. And so they've done some in Montenegro, they've done some in Turkey, in Istanbul. There's the one in San Martin, in Patagonia, and they have a lot of different reasons why they select different places. But in that one, Esmeralda is not directly involved in that project, although we love Edge City and like think that what they do is really cool. And if I wasn't just completely slammed, I would be going to the Patagonia version, but we're actually not directly involved in that one. I do try to introduce them to people in Argentina, though. I think one of the goals is for us to have Edge be part of the permanent culture in Esmeralda. So it's like a very we're very like joined at the hip in that way.
Okay, so for people who haven't got it yet, Devin is building a town, like a real. I feel like she's the founder of a town, and which is really impressive, and I think expands the definition of what people think of when they think of founders. And I think I can't think of a better person to do this than you, Devin. It's really hard. You have to be, I think, quality hardware and software challenges. Marrying that is not everyone can do that. So,
Yeah.
all right, let's nail down some stats for the people that are like more quantitative. Like, give us some stats. Like, how many acres? How many people? What's the nearest airport? Like, can you give us like those level of details?
Yes, absolutely. So it's about 300 acres, which, to give you a sense of the size, like I'll use Golden Gate Park, which may not be that good of a reference for Japanese listeners, but Golden Gate Park in San Francisco is about 1,000 acres. So this is about a third of that size. So what we're building is a really, really small town. It's like a little, it is, I call it a village. You can call it a town. But it's quite small. It'll be, but at the same time, we actually want it to be fairly dense. Like if you go to, again, an Italian hill town, or like small town in the French Riviera, or any of the small towns in Japan, like they have a pretty high density, even though they're very close to nature. I think in our first phase, we're expecting about 1,600 people to live there, but I think there's some space for that to grow over time as well. So that's something that we're interested in. And it's also very close to some existing population centers nearby. So one of the reasons why we chose the location that we have is that it's both, there's a trade-off that you make when you choose land. So if it's really close to a major city, the land is much more expensive and also much more heavily regulated. There's good reasons for both of those things. On the other hand, if you go farther away, like you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so if you're like in the middle of Nevada or something like that, it's just people don't necessarily want to live there because you're like really far away from like a major city in the first place, like in the desert or something. Or if you're in Wyoming, beautiful, but there's not a lot of opportunity. There's not a lot of services. And so what we picked was what we thought was a great sweet spot, where it was far enough away that there was a large contiguous piece of land to do something really interesting, but also close enough where if you're the first person who moves into this community, and like let's say there's literally one house on day one, we're close enough where you could like go to a grocery store that's like a 5-minute drive from the property, and not even 5, it's like 3 or 4 minutes. And you could even bike there if you wanted. It's a little bit longer to get there. But then once there's 100 people living there, now there's a critical mass to support more services. And once there's 1,000 people living there, then there's more. So we wanted to be in that sweet spot where we didn't have to like literally start everything from scratch, because that's really hard mode. And another thing that we're going to benefit from is we're actually drawing from the sewer and electrical networks and water networks that are already there. We don't have to build all of that from scratch. We do have to extend it, and that's super expensive and like a lot of engineering work, but we don't have to run our own like water plant and stuff like that. So that's the size. And then you also asked some other maybe I already answered.
Nearest airport, is it just for people that want to come visit, that want to maybe move there? I feel like amongst our set of people that travel a bunch, that where's the airport? How do I get there? Totally.
Well, the cheeky answer is that the closest airport is the Cloverdale Municipal Airport, and it's literally walking distance from the property. But that's a very small, like general aviation airport. So you're not going to be flying to Tokyo, sorry, from Cloverdale Municipal. But some other airports, both SFO and Oakland Airport are about an hour and a half away. And then there's also closer is Sonoma County Airport, which has a bunch of destinations like throughout the Western U.S. and a few other areas too. But so the Sonoma County Airport's like 20 minutes away, and then the SFO and Oakland airports are about an hour and a half.
And how about in terms of like people? What kind of people are you hoping to attract to Esmeralda?
So one of our goals is for Esmeralda to be multi-generational. So we hope that that families and people of all ages are there. I think the thing that really brings people together, and we've actually been able to see this for real with Edge Esmeralda, like having 1,000 people come each year for the last 2 years has helped us hone this. And I literally have like names of people who are excited and want to move in. The thing that brings them together, I would say, is that they love to build things. They love to learn, and they also love to do it with other people, like thinking like they're not sort of necessarily hermits just in their room working on things, which some of my favorite people are described in that way. But I would say that the ones who are drawn to this vision are like, I want to build and I want to like collaborate with other people and share ideas. And this is going to sound corny, but I think it's like people who believe that the future can be better and also are doing something about it. That's like the people that have been most drawn to our events and that we're sort of trying to build this for the most.
It might be counterintuitive given the skyscrapers in the backdrop here in Tokyo, but I kind of live like it's the 1900s. Like I walk places, I bike places, I go to like local markets, and so very, very intuitive and understandable to me. And walking distance from an airport is like really singing my tune. Whenever I've been able to, I'm very strange perhaps. I love Tokyo and I'm really, really excited. There's so many advantages, we can talk more, but whenever I've been able to travel somewhere where I've been able to walk from the airport to where I'm staying, it's been a huge victory for me, where I feel like just excited for weeks after that for just really getting energy from that.
It's actually
Palm
important,
Springs
though.
is one I've been able to do in Palm Springs in the US, a couple other places maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like walking is hard to achieve in most cities, but like even now that I'm traveling a lot more for work, I notice like if this, like in Korea, for example, in Seoul, the airport's pretty far, and I realize that impacts your traveling. And in Tokyo, you have 2 really close airports in the city. Even in Hawaii, it's pretty close. Vegas, where I lived, was very close to the Strip. So I start to notice it more that I'm like an adult and like traveling around. But
totally. My husband lived in Sweden for 2 years between moving from Argentina to the US. It's kind of like a hop. And in Stockholm, apparently you can like bike to one of the airports and you just like park your bike and you get on your plane. And then, and that's just like such a dream. And actually, you know, what you said, Alex, around living in like, it's like 1900, I actually think like one of the reasons I'm obsessed with urban planning is because there's so many ways in which humans have progressed in the last 100+ years. But I feel like urban planning is one where we've mostly regressed. And I'm a big believer that we should be taking the best of the past and the best from the future. Like, there's a lot of good things from the past that we should be learning. And I think also, you asked, like, who do we want to have there? We want families. And like, something that Northern California is not very good at is like supporting families. And I think a message I've often gotten, especially living in like a place like San Francisco, is like, it's going to be really hard to raise kids. And in fact, if you want to do stuff that's ambitious, like, maybe you shouldn't try to have kids. Like, those don't go together. And like, certainly, like, there's only 24 hours in the day. I'm not going to like be all butterflies and rainbows and say there's no trade-off ever. But I also feel like it can, like, who are we building the future for if not children? And like, making a much more conscious effort of being people who both live in the future and try to build the future, and also literally create the people who and make them wonderful people. It's like, I think we're kind of we often lose track of what it is that we're actually building for. And so I think it's we have to be balancing traditional values and traditional lessons, and also recognizing that a lot of things could be so much better. And so I think Tokyo actually does that quite well from the times that I've visited. It's like, it feels like a very rooted place while also being very dynamic and alive. Although you guys have lived there and I haven't, so you would know more than I do.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
As a newer observer, it's I get asked a lot, like, is it hard to be here? No, it's so easy to be here. It's so ordered, and to kind of pull from what you're trying to build at Esmeralda and living is part of a community. I've been really reliant on Tiffany's recommendations for what's actually sort of like navigating such a big place and knowing sort of the places to definitely visit and see. But no, it's so easy to be here and practical, and it's what you were talking about with Manhattan. You have sort of all of the benefits of culture, but in a very, very organized, very sane, very healthy place. Current summer weather accepted.
I think
a little punishing.
On the topic of Japan, I think one thing that is obviously top of mind here is just like the elderly population, and like because that's such a big kind of macro trend that we're going through. How are you thinking about like making that population inclusive for your community in your city?
Yeah, such a good question. Sonoma County, which is the county that the project is in, does have an aging population, like most of Northern California. Not as extreme as Japan, but that is the future for much of the world, California included. And we really want older people to be involved. And I think, like, it's not just a philosophical point, but also a practical one. Like, a lot of people, this is not a novel idea, but I think like a lot of people have pointed out how one of the reasons why it's more challenging to raise children in a place like the Bay Area is because, like, often people don't live near where their parents are or where other relatives are. So explicitly supporting that and encouraging that is important to us. There's a few ways that we're approaching it. One is we plan to build senior housing as part of it. We're in talks with a number of senior living developers. And just to back up a little bit, what our company is what's called like the horizontal developer. We're building like the trellis that other stuff will grow on. And then there's vertical developers, and one of the types of vertical developers we're talking to is like senior living, and we want that to be a part of it. We also don't want it to be dominant. We don't want any one like group to be dominant in this place, because then it will become imbalanced and I like sort of not work out for anybody. And then another thing that we've been doing, which is a little bit more immediate, is with Edge Esmeralda, we encourage people of all ages to come in, and I think for the people that are easiest for us to find are people around my age, because they're the people I know the best. And so like we have no trouble ever like filling that. But at the same time, we have found that there's a lot of other people in other age groups, especially older, who are interested in this. And all we need to do is like go to where they actually read the news, which is just a little different than where we do. And so we make sure to talk about our work in the local paper, and on like Facebook and stuff like that, places where that different groups are, and that's worked really well. For Edge Esmeralda, for the last 2 years, our youngest attendee was 6 weeks old, and our oldest attendee was 86 years old. And there are like a lot of people in like who are babies and older people too. So they're not just like random cherry pick numbers. One thing that's been really made me very happy is the first year we did Edge Esmeralda, we got a little bit of skepticism from locals who tend to be older on average, because they're like, what is this weird newfangled thing happening in our town? Like, who are these youngins, you know? And then, but then we were really welcoming, and we said, no, we would love for you to be part of this. This is not about us like keeping you out. Like, we want you to be part of it. And some of the people who were most skeptical the first year ended up coming and attending for the entire month the second year. And they were some of the most active people in the community. So, it's been really cool to have Edge Esmeralda be a place where we can experiment with that, because I also should say, like, it's not easy to do multi-generational stuff. Like, people do have different needs in different parts of their life and like different expectations. And like, one thing that we do is we try to have a kids room in as many of the lecture spaces as possible. So if you've got like a 4-year-old, but you want to go see the cool talk, you can put the kid in like the playroom next door. And we learned, like, this is really obvious probably in retrospect, but you shouldn't put the kids room next to the lecture room. You should put it in the back, because at some point someone's going to have a tantrum and like they're going to need to go out, and like having them walk past every single other person who's like trying to listen to this talk is like not super effective. And so like, I'm really glad we're learning that lesson now, as opposed to when we literally build everything in concrete and stone. Because we can like inform those designs. So it's a long way of saying like the event is like been a way for us to experiment with those goals and see what do the different groups and different ages actually need, so that we can build it into the permanent place.
It's such a smart approach. Using your potting metaphor, also maybe I don't know what the right is. So seems such a smart way to do it. So to your credit. And there are other. Just so people know, there are a few examples of sort of not exactly obviously Esmeralda's model, but towns that you admire that operate in a way, in this multi-generational way, in this sort of dense, but then also with access to nature. So you've spent time in a place in Costa Rica. There are a couple US towns I think you admire. Can you talk about a couple of those?
Yeah, totally. So the one in Costa Rica is called Las Carolinas, and it's one of the places where I've organized a traveling neighborhood. And it's this really small town on the western coast of Costa Rica. It was built over the last 20 years. But if you look at it, you would think, oh, this town's been here for a really long time, in a good way. It's all walkable. It's completely car free in the interior core, which sounds crazy and like really radical. But it's actually only 20 acres. And once you take the car out of an equation, suddenly everything can get so much closer, because cars take a lot of space. Like, most people are not doing the math for quite just how much space cars are taking between parking, having to get around. It's like they take a lot of space. And so you can put a lot, if you take them out and you park outside of the little town, suddenly you can fit a lot more life in the town. I wanted to see this place up close, because I thought, like, how does that actually work? That's so radical. And I think what we're doing, we're not planning to fully take the car out. Like, I think I could talk about that for a long time. We're not quite going that far, but it was really interesting to see how it did work.
Name one other town, like in maybe a US town that I know you've seen so many, or maybe somewhere you're going next, or however it makes sense to describe.
There's a cluster of them that I'll mention, and it's interesting that they're a cluster for a reason I'll get into. In the southeast of the U.S., it was started with this small town called Seaside, Florida, which is in the Panhandle, and it was built in the 80s originally, and it's actually where the Truman Show was filmed. Funny enough, it was built on these traditional town principles where there's a clear center. Cars are able to get in, and like you can certainly have a car there, but it is not built for the car. Like the car is like a tool, as opposed to most urbanism these days. And like most towns are built with like the car as the first and foremost user in mind. And that was like super radical in the US in the 1980s. And it started this whole movement. And there's a little community of practice that has sprouted up around the Florida Panhandle, and then now also through Georgia, South Carolina, and some other areas around there. Oklahoma City also has some. And it's been really cool for me to get to experience that and go to those places because growing up in California as like a coastal elite or whatever, I was always taught like, oh, there's nothing you can learn from the South. And then you go to the South and you're like, actually, they figured some stuff out. Like, they've got their issues too, but they figured that out for sure. And it's funny because a lot of the new development in the country is also being done in the South. And I think some of the best and some of the worst development is happening there. So I've learned a lot from some of the great developers who build those. And just to name a few, if people want to look them up, Seaside, Florida, Alice Beach, Rosemary Beach, Watercolor, Ion, which is near Charleston. The Wheeler District in Oklahoma City. I could keep going, and I have a whole list of them that I've collected, but there's a bunch of really good ones.
I'm deeply afraid of The Truman Show. I know that's non sequitur, but I find it like the scariest movie I've ever seen. Truly. Okay.
It is wild. Yeah. What a twist.
Yeah. Horrible. What a terrible thing to do to a person. Just
I've
so
actually seen it.
Okay, don't.
I feel like it's going to stress me out.
It's frightening.
I know.
It's frightening. No, yeah.
It is a really good movie, but yeah.
Yes, well done. Well done.
Freaky.
Yes, let's not. That was my personal, handicap with not being able to be comfortable watching that film. But okay, I so many more questions for you. But let's go with on the philosophical side, on the conceptual side. How do you think about? There's so many things in your head. You've done so much research. You've thought about everything, but do you think about urban planners like Le Corbusier or Howard, or so those are like 20th century figures, or like the Jane Jacobs versus power broker Robert Moses sort of argument in Manhattan, or there are newer projects like Google Sidewalk Labs, which I thought was really interesting at the time that it was active, and then there are a bunch of newer companies that I know from Founders Fund, like Cover, that are building modular homes. Like, do any of these sort of approaches to town building, city building, urban planning broadly appeal to you? The answer, if no is the answer, that's totally fine. Just curious.
Yeah, there's things to learn from all of them. And a lot of the things you learn are like contradictory to each other. But I think it makes sense that there's contradiction. Like you can have multiple types of truths at the same time in a city. Some of them definitely appeal to me more than others. Like I'd say Jane Jacobs is, of the ones you listed, probably one of the biggest influences. But also Robert Moses, like, the famous Nemesis, also a huge influence. Like that guy knew how to get shit done. He didn't always get things done that I think should have been done. But you gotta know game, and so I think that there's things to learn from the guy. One thing that does jump out thinking about this is like, we do kind of live in Robert Moses's world more so than Jane Jacobs' world. Like Moses, a lot of the way that he thinks has shaped the way that the US, but then also a lot of the rest of more contemporary development has happened. And you need to understand that. I think from our perspective, one of my friends recently texted me and was like making fun of me for a lot of my writing and thinking for the past like 10, 15 years has been around like cities as organisms and growing in like a more organic way. And he was making fun of me like, so you're creating a master plan community? Like what? Like you're basically leaning into the central planning, and like on some level he's 100% right. On the other level, I actually think that that's what you need to do to combat the level of central planning that's happening at the rest of the levels of the system. Like again, I know California the best, but this is true across the country and a lot of places in the world too, where a lot more things are centrally planned when it comes to land use than people realize. Like if you go into the zoning code for your local city in the US, you will find things like This agricultural zone is allowed to have a building that houses up to 4 workers, but not 5 workers. Or it'll be like, it can have like this much square footage, but not 10% more, because suddenly it goes into this other category. If you have this kind of this, then you have, and it's like, it's basically describing like the world around you in just like legal text. And this is written by people who may not have much skin in the game. They don't have that local context. It is sort of the seeing like a state, like Robert Moses, like, I don't care about your local context. And Jane Jacobs would be horrified if she saw like how things has changed. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to do a very large project as my first project, which by the way, like, I have not built one building before, but I am currently building like an entire village. And many people would say that that's crazy. But one of the reasons is because I think the level at which it's interesting to work from what I find interesting is at the level of like the system. And my goal is to create like a little bubble within which we can undo a lot of that central planning and create like more of a like a garden where things can grow, and you try to nurture it in a certain direction, but you don't like put it in a straitjacket. So ironically, I think you kind of need to like fight fire with fire a little bit with central planning to get more of a Jane Jacobsian world.
I know it's such a complex problem that you're solving, like a hard coordination problem too, but like how exactly do you even build like a town? So if you can just like walk us through.
Yes, that is all right. So
yeah, I want to understand like for people listening.
Steps. So wait. We'll give you a framework because you've laid out this framework, right? So like diligence, buy land, infrastructure, vertical development, like that level of like, if we're writing a cookbook for how do we do it?
Yeah, I would say, and I think it could be different. Like one of the key variables of like that would change how you do this is how remote is the place that you're going. So like a lot of people really like going to California wine country and like already live there and buy homes there. It's like we're not creating an entirely new market where nothing existed before. That would be a different like challenge altogether. A cool challenge that like I hope people do, but it's a bit different. For us, we're doing something hard, but it's not like the absolute hardest mode. Yeah, I think the first thing was like even just finding the land was probably the first, and then within the diligence step that you mentioned, Alex, like, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff like you want to make sure that the type of soil is like something you can build on, or at least is not super expensive to build on. You want to make sure that someone didn't like leave nuclear waste there that you don't know about, which like is like something you actually want to check. Or like some other type of like pollution that could, and like there's a lot of types of pollution, try not to ever live on top of a former gas station. Not good for your health. And so there's like stuff like that you need to check for.
How long does that take, by the way?
That kind of diligence, it depends on how detailed and like 100% certain you want to be, and it also depends on the size of the property. And like how many assumptions you're kind of willing to take. So for us, that phase took about 9 months. And I'll actually describe there's sort of 3 legs of that stool. One is just like basic site analysis that I just mentioned, like you have a geotech report, soils report, stuff like that. A second one is financial analysis. So what we did was we created a pro forma, like a financial model, where we said, okay, given that we're going to be allowed to build like approximately this amount of housing, retail, hotel, restaurants, blah, blah, blah. Here's how much we think that will cost. Like we had our general contractor do costing, and then here's how much revenue we think we'll get. And then we're like, do we think we're going to get more revenue than there will be costs? Great. Okay. And that's like, that was done at a fairly high level, and the plan will certainly change, but it was like a sanity check to be like, can you build something that will pay for itself, basically. And then the third one, which is really important and increasingly important in California, but in the world, is politics. Is it politically, like, will people let you build it? I think a lot of people who have not been in development, like most people, they think like, oh, if it's your land, you can just do whatever you want, right? And that is just like, that really couldn't be farther from the truth. Like deciding to build stuff, especially like big things, is a community decision. I say that descriptively, not normatively. There's other ways you could do it, but like that is how it is. And being able to get people excited about what you're doing and make them like get them to the point where they see it as something that will be good for them and for their town and for their community and for the county is like something that is like really important. And if you don't get that right, if you're not building something that's good for them, or you don't know how to tell the story so that they see that it's going to be positive for them, it's not going to happen. And so we wanted to diligence that as well. And one thing that we've been really thrilled about is I was expecting that to be the hardest piece, because people always tell you, like, in California, no one lets you build anything anymore.
There is counter reactions to that. Yeah.
And it's very real. Like people are generally correct that those things exist. But I think because we had done the pop-up for the first year before, like when we were just starting the diligence process, and we did this like show instead of tell, where we said, we're truly trying to create a community. We're trying to create something unique. We're not just building a bunch of like houses and then getting the heck out. You know, we're trying to build something generational and special for this whole region. We've gotten an incredible outpouring of support. And we have not had a lot of people, opposing the project. People have questions, of course, but it's not been like super negative. And it's actually been quite funny where a bunch of people on my team have decades of experience of development throughout the Bay Area, and they keep like having to pinch themselves every time we have a public meeting. They're like, "That was so positive. Like, why? Well, I've never seen that before. I didn't even know it was possible to have this much like positivity about a project." So anyways, those are the three legs of the stool of the diligence: is like the site analysis, the financial analysis, and then the basically political analysis. Like, will you be allowed to do what you want? So that's, yeah, I could talk about the other stages too, but I know you had other questions.
Okay. So you have this truly beautiful, like, I'm genuinely touched by this story of Thomas Edison himself wiring the first hotel in Chautauqua, where your grandmother lives, where you spent summers. And I'm wondering, so this may be an excuse to ask you about your team, but who will wire the first home in Esmeralda? What does your team look like now and near term? Who's helping you do this?
Yeah. Oh, I love my team. It's been really cool to get to work with them for a bunch of reasons. But one is just like, it is a really different world from the tech world that I sort of grew up in career-wise. And so it's like, I feel like I've never actually read the book, The City and the City, but like it feels like I'm like looking behind the curtain and like seeing like a different world that was always there, but I just like didn't know it that well. So, but anyway, who's on my team? So developing real estate is kind of like the movie industry in the sense that you don't have like one team where everyone is full-time and it's like a lot of people. You tend to have a very small core team. Like in the movies, it's like maybe the director and the producer. But then there's a bunch of different people who are involved at different stages of the project for shorter amounts of time. And like in the movies, that might be like there's a script writer who writes the script, but then they're kind of out. There's like the, person who does makeup on set, but then they're out. In real estate, we have like a core development team, which is me and three other people. One of them is our director of development. His name is Michael. Another one is our director of design. His name is Jess. And then we also have a project manager who makes sure that all the ships are running on time, trains are running on time. And then, so those are the four of us are working on it full time every day. And then we've got like literally hundreds of people who have touched it in different ways. So they include like landscape architects, they include civil engineers, they include general contractors, water analysts, financial analysts, hospitality experts, geotech. I mean, the list keeps going. Retail like analysts, like who like know what retail. It's like so many people who are involved, and also each of those individual categories I named each have like their own teams that like have touched it in different ways, and all of them play a really critical role in their own way. So that's the broader team. And in terms of who's going to wire the first hotel in Esmeralda, that's a really fun prompt. I think I would love for it to be one of the people who attended Edge Esmeralda. Like one of the projects that we have done the last 2 years is there's there's been a theme of like solar projects. So the first year, this awesome guy named Nick Foley, he came to Edge wanted to do this project to build a solar A-frame for a long time. Solar A-frame is basically like his term for building like an A-frame camping structure that the ceiling is like made out of solar panels, and then you can like charge your phone while you're camping, or charge a musical, like an amplifier or something, whatever it is that you want to charge. And when he arrived at Edge, he was like, oh, like I could do that here. There's like beautiful woods 10 minutes away from downtown. I wonder if I can get a crew together to like build this with me. And over the course of a few weeks, they built this solar A-frame and a bunch of other structures out in the woods. And then our closing ceremony for the whole event ended up being a solar powered night market where everyone cooked food using the solar power from the panels. And we all just like had a dance party in the woods, and it was really fun. So I'd love for Nick or one of the other people who like helped him build that to be part of building something in Esmeralda too, once there's the permanent home.
That sounds so fun. That's
It was a blast. The Edge community has some really good DJs too.
You use the term, I read you use the term solar punk, which I totally love too, as someone who comes from a little bit of a punk rock background. It's just a hacker slash, it's really beautiful. Also, it's very, very lovely and very like homey, but also sort of edgy. That combo is really fun. Okay. So I know you've thought a lot about proportions and sizing and mapping out of Esmeralda and which places are pedestrian, how big things are, where the cars can go and where they can't go. My question is, how much of our sense of physical space and what feels comfortable to you? Because when you describe an Italian hill town or when you describe Esmeralda, it just feels like organically to me the place I want to live. Mm-hmm. Like in your words, the place where you maybe want to build your future family. Same for me. It's just a good idea. It just organically, intuitively feels like a good idea. So the question is, how much of our sense of physical space do you think is like biological? Do you think is like physiological in our, it just based on who we are as human beings who evolved on this planet with certain dynamics, social dynamics, topographical dynamics, weather dynamics? Like, is this in us? Is this intrinsically in us? This ideal sort of that you're working toward?
I think it's so biological. Like it's very, very essential. I think whether this is the right ideal for everybody, I don't want to take that leap. I think there's like a lot of, what I would say is like, certain types of environmental changes can have like pretty predictable effects on how people act or behave. Like, last night, my husband and I went and had dinner at a really loud restaurant, and we were trying to do some like pretty basic math in our heads, but because it was so loud, we like could not do the math. And, or at least I couldn't. I was like, and I was like, I know how to add and subtract numbers, but my brain is just like fried right now. And then as soon as we left the restaurant, I realized like, oh, it's because like the noise was just making it impossible for me to think. And I think also other things happen, like people naturally like want to sit with like a wall behind their back. And there's a reason for that, which is that you feel safer if you know that no one can like come and attack you from the back, which is kind of it's not really a real issue in modern life, at least not luckily in my life. But it is like deeply physical. And so I think there's a lot of things when it comes to the design of physical spaces and the sounds and the pollution and anything that have pretty predictable like effects on people's behavior. And if you take all of those things into account, you're going to end up in a better place than if you don't. So yeah, I think that we're all just like walking around in meat suits, and our bodies like define a lot of what we think and do. And even stuff like right now, I currently have a chocolate bar behind my laptop screen, and I like put it there so that I would forget that it was there. And I'm only thinking about it now because we're talking about this topic. But as soon as I like put it in front of me and I can see it, like I'm going to eat it, And I really think like I have pretty good self-control. At the same time, I think if you like designing your physical space around you, like is going to do a lot around what do you actually prioritize? What foods do you eat? What thoughts do you have? And you need to be really thoughtful about programming your space to live the life that you want to lead, and something to be really careful about.
if people want to get involved, if they want to help, do you have any standard directions that you point people for how to help?
Great question. So one is we have a website. It's esmeralda.org. We are a company, but there's also the nonprofit that runs the Esmeralda Edge Esmeralda event. And then there's also when we do Edge Esmeralda again next year, we would love for people to come. I think that's actually the best is because I really believe in like showing and not telling. And so if people can actually see and live the lifestyle themselves, even if it's just for a weekend or for a week, you don't necessarily have to come for the whole month. When you're actually embedded in it, you'll start to experience like, what are the ways that I can contribute? So that's really big. And we actually just closed the fundraise a few months ago, but building a town requires a lot of money. So in the future, if you're interested in investing in individual buildings or like in the hotel or any of the later phases of the project, we'd love to hear from you. This is going to take like 10 years to build out. There's going to be a lot of different phases that work for a lot of different types of capital. So we'd love to hear from you and build something awesome.
Yeah, we'll leave links and whatnot in the description so people can reach out. Yeah. And I know Alex noted this at the beginning, but especially maybe because I'm sitting on the investor and like startup side of things. But I feel like when people think about starting a company or building, they have this image of like, following certain playbooks or building certain things. But I feel like you genuinely expand like what it means to build and be a founder. And I think sometimes we forget the creative aspect of it. And like, one, there's so many things that you can build in the world. Software and all of that's obviously super important too, but there's just so much to build. And two, there's so many ways to go about building that. So I hope this inspires people to, challenge hard questions and build creatively. So
totally. And I just have to say, like, every town that exists had to be built at some point. So in some way, what we're doing is like one of the oldest things that humans have done. And I think it's just like a little bit out of the zeitgeist, like out of the realm of what people think that they can build. But actually, like, humans have been doing that a lot longer than they've been building software. So it's not rocket science. You just gotta go build stuff.
Just a genuinely hard, genuinely valuable thing that you're doing. Thank you again, Devin. I can't wait to visit. California is my home state too, so I'll see you back there at some point, I'm sure.
Amazing. Let's do a site tour sometime. I'd love to show you around.
You're serious? I would really love that.
I'm totally serious. I mean, throughout Edge Esmeralda, I was doing site tours, and I do them outside of Edge Esmeralda too. So a lot of people have seen the property now, and I'd love to take you out on the land.
Let's go. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you
so
again.
Devin.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.